They say motels are just places to rest for the night. But some rooms never want you to leave. Behind every flickering neon sign, every stained mattress, every dark hallway, there are stories. Stories of guests who checked in but never checked out. Tonight on Bleeding Walls, we bring you 7 terrifying true motel horror stories that will make you think twice before turning that key. Subscribe now, if you dare. Story 1, Room Number 6. I was 19 when I decided to take a road trip across 3 states with nothing but a backpack, my car, and a little bit of cash. It was supposed to be freeing, a chance to escape the suffocating small town I'd grown up in. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I slept in my car at rest stops, ate gas station food, and listened to music until I fell asleep. By the 3rd night, exhaustion was clawing at me. My neck ached, my back was stiff, and my car smelled like old fast food wrappers. So when I saw the flickering neon sign for Rest Easy Motel on the side of the highway, I told myself I deserved 1 night of real sleep. The parking lot was nearly empty, but weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. The office was lit by a buzzing fluorescent bulb that seemed on the verge of dying. Inside, the desk clerk barely looked up from his crossword puzzle. He was an older man, gaunt, with eyes that didn't quite meet mine. "1 night?" I said, sliding over a few bills. He handed me a brass key attached to a heavy wooden fob. Room number 6. The room looked exactly like you'd imagine. Cheap floral bedspread, faded carpet, a bathroom door that didn't quite close, but I was too tired to care. I threw my bag down, locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed. That's when I noticed it. On the nightstand was a Gideon's Bible, as expected, but tucked inside was a scrap of paper. Written in shaky handwriting were the words, "Don't stay in room 6. Check out before midnight." I laughed nervously, telling myself it was some prank. Maybe bored teenagers messing around, or an old guest who lost his mind. I shoved the note back into the Bible and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come easy. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing just outside my door. My heart thudded as I sat up, straining to listen. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. I froze. My car was the only one in the lot. No one should have been there. The knock came again, louder. I crept to the peephole and looked out. No one. Just the empty balcony, stretching down to other rooms. I backed away from the door, every muscle trembling. Then, without warning, the TV clicked on. Static filled the room, the volume blaring. The screen flickered, and for a brief second, I swore I saw a face in the static, pale, hollow-eyed, staring directly at me. I yanked the plug from the wall, plunging the room into silence. My breaths came fast, shallow. That's when I noticed the bathroom door. It was open. I knew I had closed it earlier. The light inside flickered, and in the reflection of the cracked bathroom mirror, I saw it, someone standing behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. Terrified, I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door. But when I unlocked it and swung it open, my blood ran cold. The balcony didn't lead to the parking lot anymore. Instead, it stretched into an endless hallway lined with doors, each one numbered 6. The walls pulsed like they were breathing, and the buzzing of the neon sign outside grew louder, drilling into my skull. Panicked, I slammed the door shut and turned back toward the bed. Someone was sitting there, a man, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes, his lips stretched into a sickly smile. "You read the note too late," he whispered. His voice was dry, like rust scraping against metal. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He stood, towering over me, his face impossibly close. "You should have checked out." The next thing I remember, I was outside, standing by my car, drenched in sweat, the brass key still clutched in my hand. The motel behind me was dark. No neon sign, no office lights, no sign of life. I sped away, my heart hammering, not stopping until dawn. Later, when I told a gas station attendant about the Rest Easy motel, he gave me a strange look. "That place," he said, "it burned down 20 years ago. 6 people died in room number 6. Nobody's stayed there since." I never found the motel again, no matter how many times I retraced my route. But sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear the knock on my door. 3 sharp raps. And every now and then, in the dark reflection of a mirror, I see a pale, hollow-eyed man smiling at me. Story 2. The Woman at the Window. It was the summer of 1998 when I took a job delivering used cars across the state. The work was simple. Pick up the vehicle, drive it to the buyer, then catch a bus back home. It didn't pay much, but it kept my pockets full enough to scrape by. One night, after a long, exhausting drive in a rusted pickup with no air conditioning, I decided to stop at a roadside motel just off Route 19. The neon sign outside read, "Sleepy Pines Inn." The parking lot was empty except for 2 cars, both coated in dust, like they hadn't moved in years. The office smelled of mildew and cigarette smoke, and the clerk behind the counter barely lifted his eyes when I asked for a room. "You can take number 12, he muttered, sliding me a key. "End of the row. Don't open the curtains." I froze at that last line. "Sorry, what?" He didn't answer, just went back to his newspaper as if I wasn't there. I chalked it up to him being a grumpy old man. But as I walked down the dimly lit row of doors, his words gnawed at me. "Don't open the curtains." Room 12 was simple. Stained carpet, sagging bed, the faint smell of dampness clinging to the air. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and lay down. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. The window was covered with heavy green curtains that seemed newer than the rest of the room. They didn't match the peeling wallpaper or the broken lamp. I told myself not to care, not to think about what the clerk had said. But as midnight approached, I couldn't resist. I pulled the curtains open. At first I saw nothing, just the empty parking lot under the pale glow of a flickering light. But then, there she was, a woman. She stood just a few feet from the window, staring directly at me. Her face was pale, her hair matted, her dress torn and soaked, as though she had walked out of a river. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with sorrow and rage all at once. I stumbled back, my heart racing. But when I looked again, she was gone. I slammed the curtains shut and told myself it was a trick of exhaustion, a hallucination. But deep down, I knew better. That night's sleep was impossible. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. The creak of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the faint scrape of footsteps. And then it came, the knock, soft, deliberate, at the window. I sat frozen, staring at the shaking curtains as the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Finally I whispered, "Go away." The knocking stopped. Relief washed over me, until I heard the whisper. A woman's voice, low and broken, seeping through the glass. "Let me in." I nearly screamed. Instead, I threw the blankets over my head and stayed like that until dawn. When the first light of morning filled the room, I forced myself to open the curtains again. The parking lot was empty. But pressed against the outside of the glass was a handprint, small, delicate, but smeared with mud and something darker, something that looked like blood. Shaken, I packed my bag and headed to the office to check out. The clerk didn't even look at me. "You opened the curtains, didn't you?" he asked flatly. I didn't answer. He sighed, folding his newspaper. "She'd drowned in the river out back 30 years ago. Some say her husband left her here, promised he'd return, but he never did. Now she waits, stares in through the windows, looking for someone to let her inside." I felt sick. Why not tear the place down? The clerk looked up, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. "She won't let us." I never went back to the Sleepy Pines Inn. But sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I feel the urge to pull over, to look through the glass, to see if she's still waiting. And in my darkest dreams, I always do. And every time, she whispers the same words, "Let me in." Story 3, The Midnight Caller. I'd been driving for nearly 12 hours straight, trying to put as many miles as possible between myself and the mess I left behind. I won't get into details, but let's just say a broken engagement and a ruined reputation don't leave you many reasons to stay in your hometown. By the time the highway lights blurred into one long streak of white, I knew I needed to rest. That's when I saw it. A weather-beaten sign. Vacancy, Green Hollow Motel. The place looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 70s. Half the letters on the sign were burned out, and the lobby smelled of stale smoke. Still, I didn't care. I just needed a bed. The woman at the front desk didn't smile. She slid me a key with a rusted tag that read Room 3 and muttered, "Phones don't work after midnight." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, just stared until I took the key. The room was standard, ugly carpet, humming AC unit, a bed that sagged in the middle. But there was one thing that stood out, an old rotary phone on the nightstand, black, heavy, with a coiled cord that looked frayed. I didn't think much of it. I showered, crawled into bed, and let the exhaustion pull me under. At 12:03 a.m., the phone rang. The shrill sound ripped me out of sleep, and for a moment I thought it was part of a dream. But it kept ringing. Groggy, I picked up. "Hello?" Silence. Then, faintly, a man's voice. Raspy, urgent. "Don't answer again?" The line went dead. I sat there, clutching the receiver, my skin crawling. After a minute, I convinced myself it was a prank, maybe crossed wires. I hung up and tried to sleep. At 12:37 a.m., the phone rang again. This time, I didn't want to answer. But the sound drilled into my head, louder and louder, until I couldn't take it. I snatched the receiver. "Who is this?" Breathing, slow, heavy, right into the phone. Then the same raspy voice. "He's in the room with you." My heart nearly stopped. I whipped my head around, staring into the shadows, the chair by the window, the bathroom door slightly ajar. My pulse hammered in my ears. The line clicked, dead again. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. I grabbed the lamp, switched it on, and checked every corner of the room. Nothing. No one. I told myself I was being paranoid, that some sicko was having fun messing with guests. I shoved a chair against the door, left the light on, and crawled back into bed. At 1:12 a.m., the phone rang a third time. I didn't want to pick up. I wanted to rip the cord from the wall and throw it across the room. But something inside me, curiosity, fear, maybe both, forced my hand. "Stop calling me!" I shouted. There was no breathing this time, no rasping voice, just a low, distorted sound, like the faint hiss of static. Then words drawn out, unnatural. "Look, Under the bed. The receiver slipped from my hand. My mouth went dry. Slowly, trembling, I leaned down, the blanket dragging with me. There in the darkness beneath the bed, two eyes stared back at me, wide, unblinking, glowing faintly in the dim light. I screamed and bolted for the door, yanking the chair aside, fumbling with the lock. When I finally burst, out into the humid night, I didn't stop running until I reached the lobby. The desk was empty. No clerk, no staff, just silence. I pounded on the bell until my hand hurt. Finally, the woman appeared from the back room, her expression flat. "You answered, didn't you?" she said softly. I stared at her, breathless, terrified. "There was someone under the bed." She shook her head. "There hasn't been anyone in that room for years. Not alive, anyway." She took the key back from my trembling hand, slid it into a drawer full of rusted tags, and whispered, "Next time, don't pick up." I didn't wait to argue. I sprinted to my car, tires screeching as I tore out of the parking lot. I never saw the Green Hollow Motel again. Maybe it only shows itself to people running from something, people too broken to know better. But sometimes when my phone rings after midnight, I hesitate to answer, because deep down, I fear it won't be a wrong number. It'll be him, the midnight caller. Story 4, The Room with No Mirror. I was on my way back from a funeral when the storm hit. Sheets of rain hammered my windshield, thunder shook the sky, and visibility dropped to nearly nothing. I knew I couldn't keep driving, so when I saw the glowing sign for a small roadside motel, I pulled in without a second thought. The place was called Silver Star Inn. The parking lot was nearly empty, the lights flickering in the downpour. Inside the office, the air was damp and smelled faintly of mildew. The clerk, a woman in her late 40s, slid me a key before I could even ask for a room. "Room 7, she said. "Stay inside, don't look for the mirror." Her words made no sense, but I was too soaked and exhausted to care. I nodded, took the key, and ran through the rain to the room. Room 7 was ordinary enough. Bed, dresser, TV, bathroom. But something felt off. It took me a few minutes to realize what it was. There were no mirrors. Not in the bathroom, not on the dresser, not anywhere. For a motel room, it was strange. My damp reflection stared back at me only from the darkened window. I shrugged it off, changed into dry clothes, and lay on the bed, the storm still raging outside. But sleep didn't come. Around midnight, I woke to a sound, a faint scratching. At first, I thought it was the branches outside, but then I realized it was coming from inside the room, the dresser. The drawers rattled softly, as though something inside was pushing against them. Heart pounding, I got up and yanked one open. Empty. The second drawer. Empty. The third. Empty. But when I bent down to check the last drawer, I froze. Instead of wood, the bottom was glass, a mirror. And in that mirror I saw something that shouldn't have been there. It was me, but not quite. My reflection grinned even though my mouth was shut. Its eyes were wide, hungry, alive with something wrong. I stumbled back, slamming the drawer shut. My breath coming in short gasps. The scratching stopped, but now I could hear whispering, soft, taunting. "Let me out." I backed toward the bed, shaking my head. No. No? The drawer rattled violently, the wood creaking as though about to split. Then silence. I sat frozen for what felt like hours until exhaustion overtook me. Somehow I drifted into uneasy sleep. At dawn I woke to find the drawer half open. The mirror inside was cracked, a thin spiderweb fracture running across the glass. My reflection stared back at me, but its lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. Terrified, I grabbed my bag and bolted from the room. At the front desk, the clerk watched me with tired eyes. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. She sighed. "That's why there are no mirrors in this place. The thing in room 7, it waits. Every time someone opens that drawer, it learns a little more. Learns how to look like us, how to move like us. Someday the glass won't hold it anymore." I left without another word, my skin crawling. For weeks afterward, I avoided mirrors. I covered them in my apartment, refused to look into them at work. But eventually, I slipped. One morning, brushing my teeth, I glanced at the bathroom mirror, and for just a second, my reflection didn't move. It just smiled. Story 5. The Locked Door. I was driving cross-country with my younger brother Mark when our car broke down on a deserted stretch of highway. By the time a tow truck came, it was nearly midnight, and the mechanic told us he couldn't get the parts until morning. He dropped us off at the only motel in town, Haven Rest Lodge. The place looked abandoned. Half the windows were boarded up, and weeds crawled over the cracked pavement. But the office light was on. Inside, an old man handed us a single brass key. "Room 9, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "And whatever you do, don't open the locked door." Mark laughed as we walked to the room. "Classic creepy motel warning," he said. "This place probably just has a storage closet they don't want us snooping in." But when we entered room 9, I understood the warning. It looked normal at first. 2 twin beds, a dusty TV, the faint smell of mold. But at the far end of the room, next to the bathroom, was a heavy wooden door with a rusted lock built into it. Unlike the other doors, this one had no handle. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. We unpacked, argued about who got which bed, and eventually tried to sleep. But I couldn't stop staring at that door. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was rats in the walls, but then I realized it was coming directly from the locked door. "Mark," I whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned. "What?" "Listen." We both froze as the scratching grew louder, more frantic. Then came a whisper, faint, childlike. "Let me out." Mark sat him up, eyes wide. What the hell was that? The whisper came again, this time with a desperate edge. "Please, let me out." I wanted to run, but Mark's curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door. "Don't!" I hissed, but he pressed his ear to the wood. "It sounds like a kid," he whispered. "We can't just leave them in there." Before I could stop him, he tapped the lock. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then the lock clicked. We both stumbled back as the door creaked open a few inches. The air that spilled out was ice cold, carrying the smell of rot. "Hello?" Mark whispered, shining the flashlight inside. The beam caught something. A small figure crouched in the shadows. It looked like a child, pale and thin, its limbs too long, its head cocked unnaturally to the side. The figure crawled forward on all fours, its movements jerky, unnatural. When the light hit its face, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a child. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth stretched impossibly wide into a grin filled with jagged, rotting teeth. Mark screamed, slamming the door shut. We fumbled with the lock, our hands shaking, finally securing it as the thing pounded from the other side, shrieking in a voice that was no longer childlike. "Let me out!" We didn't sleep after that. We sat frozen until the sun rose, the pounding finally ceasing. When we checked out, the old man at the desk looked at us knowingly. "You opened it, didn't you?" he asked. Neither of us answered. He sighed. "That door doesn't keep of anything in. It keeps something out, and now that it knows your names—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just pray it doesn't follow you home." That was 2 years ago. Mark doesn't talk about it anymore, but sometimes at night, I hear scratching at my apartment door. And once, just once, I heard the faintest whisper sliding through the wood. "Let me out." Story 6. The Guest Who Never Left. I was 21 when I worked the night shift at a rundown roadside motel just outside Amarillo. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for gas and groceries. My job was simple: check in the occasional traveler, answer the phones, and keep the lobby light on. Most nights were quiet. But there was one rule the owner drilled into me during training. "Never rent out room 5. I asked why. He just shook his head. "Because the guest is still in there." At first I thought it was some weird joke, but the longer I worked there, the more I noticed things I couldn't explain. Room 5's door was always locked, yet sometimes I'd see shadows moving under the crack. Other times when I passed by, I'd hear faint noises, water running, drawers opening, the creak of footsteps. The strangest part was the smell. Every so often, a strong odor of cigarette smoke would drift into the hallway. Nobody had smoked in that room for decades, according to the cleaning staff. One stormy night, a family of 4 came in, exhausted from driving all day. Every room was booked except for room 5. I hesitated, remembering the rule, but the father pleaded. His kids were crying, and his wife looked like she might collapse. Against my better judgment, I handed him the key. They thanked me and trudged down the hall. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then around 2 a.m., the phone rang at the front desk. It was the mother. Her voice shook. "There's someone in here." I sat up straight. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "We locked the door. But there's a man sitting in the chair by the window. He won't stop staring at us." I froze. "Stay calm. I'm coming." Grabbing the spare master key, I rushed down the hall. When I reached room 5, I heard the children sobbing inside. My hands trembled as I shoved the key into the lock and pushed the door open. The room was dark, empty. The family huddled together on the bed, pale and shaking. The chair by the window was empty, but the air reeked of cigarette smoke. "There was someone there," the father insisted, his eyes wide. "He didn't say anything. He just kept looking at us." I ushered them into another room that had just checked out, apologizing, trying to calm them down. But when I went back to room 5 to close it up, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. On the nightstand was an ashtray. Inside, a fresh cigarette burned, the smoke curling into the air. The next morning, I told the owner what happened. He didn't even look surprised. "That room belonged to a man named Carl," he said quietly. "A salesman. He stayed here in 1974, smoked 3 packs a day, never stopped talking about his business deals. One night, he sat in that chair by the window and put a bullet through his head. Ever since then, guests say he's still there, watching, waiting. I wanted to quit right then, but I needed the money, so I stayed. Over the next few weeks, more things happened. Guests in other rooms complained about knocking on their doors in the middle of the night. Housekeepers refused to clean near room 5. And once, while making my rounds, I swear I heard a voice whisper from inside. Check in, check out, stay forever. I left that job at the end of the summer, but I'll never forget the night I closed up for the last time. I walked past room 5, and for a brief moment, the door stood wide open. Inside, a man sat in the chair by the window, pale, thin, his suit outdated, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He turned and looked at me, and he smiled. I never told anyone about that final moment. But sometimes when I stay in cheap motels off the highway, I check the nightstands, and every now and then I find an ashtray with a cigarette still burning. Story 7, Room for One More. It was the dead of winter when I found myself stranded in the middle of nowhere. My car had given up after sliding off a sheet of black ice, and I had no choice but to walk until I saw a light. After nearly an hour in the freezing wind, I spotted it, a glowing neon sign that read, Sunset Motel. The place was quiet, eerily so. Snow blanketed the parking lot, yet there were no tire tracks, no footprints. The office light was on, though, and I stumbled inside, grateful for warmth. Behind the counter stood a tall man in a faded uniform. He looked too perfect, hair combed neatly, smile wide, eyes that didn't seem to blink. Room for one? He asked. His voice was low, too calm. Yes, I muttered, my teeth chattering. He slid a key across the counter. Room 13, end of the hall. We've been waiting for you. I froze. What do you mean? But he only smiled. Room 13 was warm, almost too warm, as if the radiator had been blasting for hours. The bedspread was clean, the lamps polished, the bathroom spotless. It was the nicest motel room I'd ever seen, especially compared to the dumpy office. Exhausted, I dropped my bag and collapsed onto the bed. I didn't even bother to check my phone. There was no signal anyway. But just as I began to drift into sleep, I heard it. A whisper. Room for one more. I sat up, heart pounding. Hello? Silence. I shook it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then it came again, louder this time, right by my ear. Room for one more. I bolted upright. The room was empty. The door was locked. Then I noticed something strange. The nightstand drawer was open just a crack, and inside was a leather-bound guest book. I pulled it out, curious. The first page listed names, hundreds of them, going back decades. Each entry ended with the same words written in neat, identical handwriting. Checked in, never checked out. As I flipped through, my stomach dropped. Near the end of the book was my name, written in fresh ink. I dropped the book, stumbling back, my chest tight with fear. That's when I saw them, figures standing in the corners of the room, pale, translucent, their faces blank. One by one they whispered in unison, "Room for one more." I tried to run, but the door wouldn't budge. My hands slipped on the knob as the whispers grew louder, deafening, surrounding me. The lights flickered, the walls seemed to pulse, and the shadows crept closer. Suddenly the tall man from the front desk was there, standing inside the room, his grin wider than ever. "There's always room for one more," he said softly. The last thing I remember was cold hands grabbing me, pulling me into the dark. When I woke, I was back outside in the snow. The motel was gone. No sign, no building, just an empty field. I convinced myself it was a nightmare brought on by exhaustion. But when I reached into my pocket, my blood ran cold. There it was, the brass key to room 13. And on the back of the tag, freshly engraved, were the words, "Checked in, never checked out."